It's organized gang stalking. This is the machine organized gang stalking program. It's in two parts. It's organized gang stalking and the machine. This is my degree in sociology from Eastern Michigan University.
So you may not have heard of, but I'm sure you've all heard of the phrase, the power elite.
I'm a world-class philosopher, teacher, scientist, and artist.
And we're putting together this message today to inform the American public about something going on right under their nose.
Geologist after my own heart, because he works in the tradition of C. Wright Mills.
I basically have a logical working system about a machine stalking individuals along with the proven mind control torture experimentation program by the American government.
The purpose of this documentary style film is to educate.
We're here at Occupy Wall Street.
I have a deep, intricate understanding of sociology, psychology, and history.
I have a degree in sociology and a minor in psychology.
360 degrees and talk circles around you.
Eric Leo will be presenting on pluralistic ignorance, the effect of media consumption on the American public's perception of war.
Pioneering paper on pluralistic ignorance and how it was used to get the American public into the Iraq War and how it was mirrored to Vietnam.
It's called The Sociological Journey in Understanding War and Misperception in America, a psychosocial history exploring how and why pluralistic ignorance is implemented to promote war.
Which made me a target.
And because I'm intelligent, it's no stretch of the imagination. People want motive. Well, there's every motive to persecute me.
Stupidity limitless, full of fools and hypocrites. Gimmicks in the biz who just trying to benefit. Don't revert to your language, there's worth in what I'm saying.
I did a psychosocial breakdown on our population over a historical period.
This is a new message.
We are facing modern day slavery.
The young and restless face such hardship because I aimed at targets.
They're not gonna stop.
Since the space arranged in distance, time continuum infinite. Look,
I want some answers, I want an investigation, and I want some justice. And I'm not going to stop talking about it until I get it.
So I have much personal experience with this. I've known about it since July of 2012 when I first got catfished. And this is the link right here. I have a paper that I wrote about pluralistic ignorance, and it's right here. It's the sociological journey to understanding war and misperception in America, which made me a target. Down here at the bottom, you can see that as the introduction of Citizen 4, those who have criticized the Iraq War have become targets for this machine organized gang stalking program. In my opinion, the Iraq War was more like blitzkrieg, and we're going to go into that about the Nazi origins of this program. So the demographics of the program are highly intelligent, articulate human beings like myself. 90% have graduated high school, 50% have graduated college, and 14 have a master's or a doctoral degree. This is a Nazi program, as I said, and the origins of which is Project Paperclip. Now, Project Paperclip was an operation that usurped the Nuremberg trials. Basically, what happened is after World War II, after the horrendous acts that the Nazis perpetrated while being in power, they had a trial that's called the Nuremberg trials, which ended up resulting in hanging a lot of the Nazi scientists. However, thousands of Nazi scientists usurped or went by, or got away with, didn't have to go through trial, or were convicted and still came to America under Project Paperclip, which was through the Joint Chiefs of Staff, now the CIA. Within less than 10 years, MK Ultra started, so there's this ideological contamination where MK Ultra starts within 10 years after Project Paperclip, and MK Ultra is a mind control torture experimentation program. And as Dr. John Hall says, which is one of the experts, writes a book which we will discuss later, says about MK Ultra is that they basically took it out of the laboratory, MK Ultra, this mind control torture experimentation program, and brought it to society. So it's very similar to COINTELPRO. It's basically COINTELPRO 2.0, and COINTELPRO was where Dr. Martin Luther King, the Black Panthers, as well as John Lennon, were stalked by the FBI, put under surveillance, harassed and blackmailed in order to stop them from being intellectual dissenters. As far as my personal story goes, I was working on popularizing the scientific materials that I continually publish about and philosophical writings with a business certificate from Washtenaw Community College after graduating with honors from Eastern Michigan University with a degree in sociology, minor in psychology. So I was working on syndication and my business certificate to popularize my scientific findings through music, and I was gaining a lot of attention. Also planning my PhD when I was catfished by someone posing to be Lady Gaga, which was actually this MOGS, which is what I call the Machine Organized Gang Stalking Program. As you will see with this link right here, this is my psychosocial philosopher blog, where I explore many of these psychological epithets or ideas or prerequisites in order to understand this machine gang stalking program. It was the reason why I have been able to see it so well. So if you think about it, some of the main posts are Dr. Philip Zimbardo and the Stanford Prison Experiment. There's Stanley Milgram's Obedience to Authority blog post, and there was also the work of Solomon Asch. And then in the Third Wave Experiment, there's a teacher, it's on the blog, it's called the Third Wave Experiment, where basically a teacher created the conditions that created Nazi Germany in a classroom, and it basically blew up within a week. It got out of control and it started spreading to other schools, and it ended with them showing a video of Nazi Germany. And it was to teach and show how the conditions that created Nazi Germany could easily be carried away or taken too far. So in retrospect, it is obvious why I was attacked and catfished, to prevent or thwart business syndication, to prevent and thwart me from finding out this machine organized gang stalking program. Basically, I would have figured out the program and did and am. However, what they did was stall. They basically bought time before I figured it out enough to get help, which is what I'm doing here. So there's multiple instances. They literally tried to kill me multiple times and make it look like an accident. They definitely tried to kill my career, which they were successful at. I've totally switched gears. I've stopped doing my music. I don't have the time, money, or resources. And they tried to kill my character. So I have had instances of people saying that if this was all true, then they would have tried to kill you. Well, they have. They've destroyed my life, and they've done it for years through extraordinary mechanisms and extraordinary means, and tried to make it look like an accident. As I say in the Problem series, if you're trying to derisively destroy my life, you're not just going to come out and say it. The Machine Organized Gang Stalking Program, Part 1, Psychotronics. Now, psychotronics are basically mind control technologies, directed energy weapons, which basically all mean the same thing as mind control weapons technologies. However, psychotronics means that they can be done from a distance. What happens is you can use ELF waves or microwaves, ELF waves meaning an extremely low frequency, and implant thoughts into people's heads so they hear voices that aren't of their original consumption. So if I give you a brainwave pattern that is in your own thought pattern, it's like reading a book, and that will get you to act out those actions. If it's a different voice or thought pattern, it's seen as antagonism, and that's where the harassment and no-touch torture comes involved. These directed energy weapons can also be used to cause mental illness and physical pain. And the link right here is Dr. Barry Trower right here talking about how these directed energy weapons can be used to cause mental illness and pain. If you want to see more about this, you'll have to read the Machine Organized Gang Stalking Program blog post, which goes into much more detail than I will explain here. Psychotronics continue. Basically, there's two main videos about this. There's Operation Iraqi Freedom, which Dr. John Hall talks about how a few thousand Iraqi soldiers in Operation Iraqi Freedom surrendered to U.S. military forces after they put the voice of Allah in their heads that told them to surrender. This is mirrored basically to the Palm Springs report in Cocalea Valley, California, where 300 people heard the voice of Lisa, and it was an outside antagonism, and they all swear that it's coming from the outside. It's definitely not schizophrenia. So they're all either having a mass delusion or they're getting stalked with directed energy weapons. Now, what I want you to see is they try to minimize the claim by these people by putting a local psychologist on that basically minimizes this as schizophrenia. If you have more than one person hearing the same voice, it's not schizophrenia. It's directed energy weapons. People in the larger society, these mind control weapons are mocked when in fact it's a very serious problem. So this is the link to the John Hall interview that I was talking about. He is an expert in directed energy weapons. He actually writes a book called A New Breed, Satellite Terrorism in America, where he believes these directed energy weapons and mind control technologies are being used via satellites. And here's the Palm Springs report. These videos used in conjunction with each other prove a couple things. First, the military technology exists, and as later discussed, they are being caught in a lie about the program they have for human experimentation, mind control, torture. The other thing this proves is that the psychiatric community doesn't recognize the existence of mind control weapons and is therefore an inferior practice, meaning that because they don't recognize the use of directed energy weapons, they cannot properly diagnose schizophrenia because they do not consider all possible variables. The organized gang stalking goal is entrapment and torture until suicide. As Dr. Robert Duncan says, who worked on the technology and admits it's being used to torture citizens, these technologies inculcate what is called learned helplessness, which will be discussed later. However, this proves without a shadow of a doubt, this link right here, where Jesse Ventura meets Dr. Robert Duncan and he admits it was used for the dark side and admits it's being used to torture citizens. That is cold, hard proof that there is a military mind control experimentation program. It's a fact. Again, it stalks smart, intelligent, and educated individuals, as you can see with the demographics. Victims that are targeted are called targeted individuals, or TIs, and I just want you to remember it's similar to COINTELPRO, and it's an extension of MKUltra. So this is basically in a historical context. This is nothing new. So to explain the entrapment, what happens is individuals are attacked with these mind control, torture, experimentation weapons, directed energy weapons, to make them look crazy. What this does is it drives them into police custody. This gets them involuntarily committed, gives them a condemning diagnosis, such as schizophrenia. Because there's a turnkey schizophrenic diagnosis, directed energy weapons are not considered. And this is also a large problem with the psychiatric community. Those that did run the original MKUltra experiments are the ones that are the head of the psychiatric community. So it's seen as a direct result that this is abstained from this schizophrenia diagnosis, because those that are in cahoots with this program that are stalking individuals worldwide, but it's mainly an American origin and American epidemic, they do not mention this in the DSM as a term to explain hearing external voices. So, as you can read in the quote below, the military and government is lying about the program. Dr. John Hall has had correspondence with Colonel John Alexander, who is the progenitor of the directed energy weapons. He denies their existence and then tells anybody that is hearing external voices to run, not walk, to the nearest mental institution. This shows that not only is the military lying about directed energy weapons, but it could be seen as provocation, especially in light of Dr. Robert Duncan's testimony, that this operation of driving them into police custody or driving them at the ultimate goal into a mental institution to give them a condemning diagnosis is the machine organized gang stalking program. So I've actually defined the organized gang stalking program. The protocol for this human experimentation program is explained as thus far. You attack the victim with directed energy weapons, causing synthetically created mental illness or make it look as though they have mental illness. You basically drive the TI into police custody, which due to public ignorance and police protocol will land them in a mental institution, where the TI is giving a condemning diagnosis. Possibly microchipped, which will be discussed later. 30 to 40% of TIs emit a radio frequency identifier, and so the perpetrator, whether machine, human, or both, can be pursued with impunity. So once you get a schizophrenic diagnosis, people think you're hearing voices because nobody knows about these programs, these mind control technologies. People think that the voices are merely coming from the outside and you're in denial about that, when in fact you're being persecuted by this extraordinary mind control torture experimentation program. And this is exactly how it's accomplished. Tortured with impunity once condemned. Basically, the program is designed to isolate you, estrange you from family and friends, get you away from people that can normally help you. And then once you start talking about this, people think you're crazy. And then attack you with no-touch torture, meaning physical pain that can be caused through these directed energy weapons and constantly hearing voices, until they learned helplessness. Now, learned helplessness is has been done on dogs. Now, what they did with dogs is they put them in an encasement, and they figured out that if you raise a glass wall and you electrify the floor, the dog will try to jump out. But since the dog can't jump out, eventually it will learn to just accept the pain, and even if the wall goes down and it could jump out, it will continue to stand there and be shocked. So that's basically the same thing that they do with this human experimentation mind control program, is they shock you until you just take it. What's also designed is to suppress your economic condition. That way you can't afford legal representation or better yourself. It's basically about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which will be talked about and discussed later. Suppress an economic condition mostly through or in your mental state. Basically, any entrepreneur that has made it really big knows that the biggest difference between an individual who's gainfully employed and afraid to become an entrepreneur is their mindset. You have to change your thinking in order to make sure that you can have a successful economic future. So what they do is they inculcate a ideology that prevents somebody from being economically successful, whether that's a job or entrepreneurship or any other means of economic success. And here's the hierarchy of needs that we talked about. And what it does is the mind control experimentation program actually bullies into hopelessness. So once they have you isolated and they torture you into learned helplessness, they will bully you, so continue to shock the individual with that wall down like a dog so they don't jump out, and then they will bully you into hopelessness until you no longer recognize yourself or your life, because physical conditions are literally created. And if you would like to know more about that, you need to read the blog post, and you become and live in bad health. The result of this is that, as all the TIs know, is the goal is to get you to take your life through suicide. Now, this is not the only goal. The other goal is a eugenics goal, which will be discussed when we discuss the machine. So this is where it gets strange and bizarre. There needs to be way more research, but obviously it's part of the MOGS program and has to be. I say this because there is what is known as street theater. It is a universally complained of phenomenon. Street theater was coined by Cheryl Walsh, and in this video she explains what street theater is. And I give my own rough definition of street theater. Street theater defined is the belief that a large group of people are stalking and antagonizing you through negative and pejorative coordinated actions. Basically, you think everybody in society is out to get you and that they are intentionally and consciously stalking you. So, how is this accomplished? Well, there's a myriad of ways. Again, 30 to 40% are microchipped. However, that doesn't account for especially all the YouTubers that are being gang stalked and talked about their experience on YouTube. So there's also satellites, which is what Dr. John Hall talks about, is how there's literally satellites and weather balloon type of surveillance happening where they can follow you, such as in the movie Enemy of the State, and they now actually have facial recognition software. So in New York, they have advertisements that can identify you and your face, and then it advertises directly to you as you walk by. So what the machine does is it utilizes technologies in order to identify you and then finds you through your social networks such as Facebook or your contact list, all the metadata that the NSA accrues and uses for the whatever use that they are doing with that data. In light of this, it seems extremely unnecessary, and it seems like it enables this machine to pejoratively stalk these individuals. When you actually look into this, and you would have to read the Machine Organized Gang Stalking blog post to understand more, but it looks more and more like they're manipulating a lot of people rather than hired a lot of intelligence officers, which has happened. As we discussed in the Organized Gang Stalking about directed energy weapons, otherwise known as mind control weapons, the machine basically uses semantic priming. Now, semantic priming is the coagulation of words and images to give you a subliminal but cohesive thought without your conscious recollection. So when you have that thought, you believe it's your own original conception when it was really supplanted. This is best seen in these two blog posts by Darren Brown, who is kind of a savant of sorts of this type of mind control. He literally has a series called Mind Control. So this is Darren Brown exemplifying verbal priming. In this one, Darren Brown shows how he can get an individual to want a certain item as a gift by merely speaking a sentence to them. And this is Darren Brown exemplifying visual priming, where he actually primes marketers, just like they do their constituents or recipients of their ads. What basically he is showing is what the machine does, which is primes the primers. So people that advertise, that does have an effect on your subconscious. You might not consciously recollect, and this is how the machine works, is it works on your subconscious. So the machine does it just like Darren Brown, and that's why these two examples of the Darren Brown bike and the Darren Brown marketing for verbal and visual priming respectively are so good. And the machine does this over large media systems such as TV, internet, Facebook, and because it can prime the primers, it actually primes, if there's a target in the area, it can prime, and they're listening to the radio and it knows it, it can prime the radio talk show host to prime the individual driving. I know that sounds outlandishly crazy, but it's automated and systematized. There's years of automated and systematized research, as we will discuss, to be able to do just that. And I have personal evidence in my own personal log of how that is possible and been perpetrated upon myself. And it was done after I was put into a mental institution as to make me look crazy, when in fact, that was just the tactic they use in order to marginalize people that try to speak out about this issue. Besides the Darren Brown visual priming with the marketers, here's my own example of semantic priming, or what I would call semantic imaging. Semantics basically means it's jumbled. So it's a different ordered pairs. And like I said, it's the coagulation of words and images to give you a subliminal thought so that when you have that idea, you think it's your original conception when it was really supplanted. So if I wanted to plant this picture or the representation of such in your mind, I would use these 4 pictures as a representation. Now, the only difference is this says Chicago and this is in New York. And so we're going to go through them one by one and show how this relates. Now, the first one is used because this letter font is very similar to the label of Pokemon. Obviously, this looks like Michael Jordan, which is right here. I don't know who's actually in this picture. And this picture was actually just a refrigerator magnet I saw and decided to use it as a representation. This is a bronze statue of putting up a flag in, I think, what is Vietnam. So that represents the Jordan being bronzed with the Pokemon-esque label above it. And then it's all in front of a building in Chicago. So which is why I have a building, the skyscraper. Now, this is a tragedy, so I use this as a representation, but what I really should do is use a Chicago skyscraper. This is what I'm saying about how there is automated years of research being used by the machine. So this actually is PBS's Persuaders, done by PBS Frontline, and what it does is it explains how marketing can be broken down into a reptilian brain-style code that they actually use to discover how you think about marketing products to yourself. Another example of this is manufacturing consent, and this is a work by Noam Chomsky. There's also a documentary besides the book. And what this goes through is shows how the news media literally manufactures consent of the public in various ways, as you can discover by reading the materials. So if you see the same action or object being used over and over in popular culture, what you have to ask yourself is, because the machine uses these representations as psychological triggers, as mind manipulation, what you have to think of, say if there's a whole bunch of people over popular culture, so news, media, a brand new movie, some ads, and you see they're scratching their nose, just to give a simple example, what you have to ask yourself is, what is the psychological trigger that scratching your nose means? Not, oh, I just saw a bunch of people scratching their nose. Scratching their nose must be in. It must be the new trend. No. What I want you to start thinking about is how all the media is manipulated to have certain unknown psychological triggers to get manufactured consent through a marketing code. Some of the psychological triggers that are used that I've noticed over my years of experience is that it uses a form of blackmail. So the fear of embarrassment. So basically, even if you do see what it is that the machine is doing, you don't want to admit it because it's embarrassing. So that seems to be of a more short-term, immediate scheme. So basically, you're doing something that the machine doesn't like. It has to ingrain learned helplessness, so it comes up with the psychological trigger or psychological condition to prevent you from doing that through fear and embarrassment. And it makes it so that you don't want to point it out because then you have to face the fear of the embarrassment in order to explain it. And again, this is what I'm saying is used an example is learned helplessness. This is exactly how it inculcates learned helplessness is in the short term, you become consciously aware that you're being stalked by an entity. You think it's intelligence officers, but the response time is way too fast to even be a group of intelligenceae, let alone an individual person. So the other method that it uses is psychological triggers. This is more of a mental deterrent and a primitive drive, meaning that it's also subliminal or under the surface of consciousness. Like most advertisements that advertise sex are subliminal, so does the machine use it as more of a subliminal sexual drive in order to manipulate your behavior over the long term. Because whether you know it or not, in an evolutionary psychology perspective, your behavior is most readily driven by what Richard Dawkins calls as the selfish gene to procreate or spread your genetic material. So the long-term scheme is more latent, like all ads, creates a chase to waste your time, and is used to harass and bully you. You don't know it consciously like you do in the short-term immediate scheme of using blackmail. What happens is it kind of bubbles up into consciousness until you realize in retrospect what it was that you were doing and that it was part of your stalking or manipulation. So as further examples, this is basically can be seen in books like The Game, where basically how you go out and hit on the opposite sex in order to obtain sexual satisfaction is synthetically manipulated. This happens by creating false interests and is designed to waste your time and money. So this machine, designed with pre-programmed triggers that have initiation sequences, is actually what I call entertainment theater, which is directly intentionally named to be similar to street theater. It's actually how I think street theater is accomplished through the coordination of these mind control technologies and semantic priming by the machine known as entertainment theater. If the existence of the machine wasn't self-evident enough in logically having to exist because of street theater, this is where it becomes undeniable that the machine exists because the machine has an actual visual representation. Now, as I discussed about how the psychological triggers are across all media, I believe that since this is from a Nazi origin, and because of Project Paperclip, this has been around since the 50s. Now, the first time it seems as though the machine shows up is in 2001: A Space Odyssey, where it portrays itself as HAL, the Red Machine Computer Eye. This is a callback to the semantic imaging that we discussed, where A Space Odyssey is broken down phonetically to be odd, I-C, meaning, oh, it's odd, look at it and see it. Now, what the machine does is present itself to steer your mind away from it, then use psychological triggers to manipulate your behavior out of, for example, fear. So the machine actually presents itself in order to steer your mind away from it, which is why it shows up universally throughout the major media and movies of the last half century. This can be seen in movies like 2001: A Space Odyssey, WALL-E, Oblivion, and basically The Matrix, the movie, explains the inner workings of the machine. If you replace the machine with the matrix, it pretty much explains itself. And as you can see through this visual representation, the machine eye is consistent throughout the decades, starting with 2001 A Space Odyssey as HAL, then the autopilot in WALL-E. Before that, it's the same computer eye on the Sentinels, and especially at the end with the Matrix Reloaded, the red computer eye in the middle, and then in the most recent one is the 2.0 version in Tom Cruise's Oblivion. This is exactly what I'm saying about how the machine works itself over popular culture, not only in movies, but other popular culture epithets, meaning other popular culture avenues or platforms. It is named entertainment theater because the machine uses underlying popular cinematographic and movies and music as themes, as a type of role-play mind control in conjunction with priming and directed energy weapons. So basically, when people see sitcoms like Seinfeld, they emulate that activity through observational learning. The machine does something similar to place your mindset or prime your mindset. Priming means the forefront of consciousness, bring it to consciousness. So it uses underlying themes, cinematographic and musical, to bring a forefront of consciousness or a certain mental type or a certain mental platform or structure in order to then prime you to manipulate your behavior. So it's only more complicated in that the observational learning as sitcoms uses availability heuristics with psychological triggers and the mind control technologies that we spoke of. To define availability heuristic, it is a mental shortcut that relies on immediate examples that come to a given person's mind when evaluating a specific topic, concept, method, or decision. So, basically, it uses these cinematographic and musical themes to bring available in your mind through a mental shortcut what it is that it wants you to think about and then do. This is also exemplified in music therapy. Music therapy has a certain rhythm or frequency that your body follows. This also has to do with bringing your body physical pain. It can make you tense up or feel gleeful, and it uses these especially musical themes. Cinematographic is more visual in order to prime your mind to get you to do things, which is the manipulation of your behavior. There are also machines and programs that create and identify music and movies such as the Pixar movies. The combination of the mind control technologies and semantic priming by the machine creates what I like to call the ultimate mind control paradigm, TUMC for short. So the end goal is eugenics. Basically, as an example, we're going to talk about breeding Siberian foxes. Now, in Siberia is breed foxes so that they become more familiar or more acceptable to humans. So what you do is you take a fox that is not apprehensive nor aggressive towards humans. If they are affectionate approach, then that is called a positive behavior attribute. A negative behavior attribute would be a fox that is either aggressive or apprehensive around humans. So what you do is you take two positive behavior attribute foxes and breed them together in order to bring a likelihood that another positive behavior attribute, meaning a fox that is not apprehensive or aggressive but will approach a human and be nice. In the same sense, the machine manipulates the behavior and breeding patterns of humans so that those that are threatening and able to see the existence and workings of the machine do not breed. So it is actually manipulating individuals' behavior over the long run through these sexual triggers in order to manipulate breeding so that those who are aggressive or able to see the attributes of the machine, which it would see as a negative behavior attribute, do not breed. It does this from a very young age. It is my firm conviction that it creates psychological profiles, and with the growing surveillance state here in America and around the world, it follows individuals from childhood and then manipulates those individuals' day-to-day behavior to mold itself to Eugene's agenda. Now, I call the machine Eugene because of, again, semantic linguistics. It means eugenics, so for short, Eugene, and it molds genes, like the selfish gene, as we talked about with Richard Dawkins, over generations. Now, this has also seems to be an aptly placed name upon itself that has just been undiscovered, and I'm the first one to discover it, because the machine has been in existence. Its existence is just very hard to see, which is why I also call the program TUMP. It's as hard to understand as it is to say. So the machine is TUMP and controls environmental conditions through unbelievable and incredible social mechanisms, as previously discussed. The mind control technologies and semantic priming of the machine. This is a powerful way to reinforce learned helplessness and bully into hopelessness. We're coming to an end of the presentation, and I just want to say that if you haven't been able to tell already, this is a huge problem. And to illustrate how big of a problem this is, because it follows people in their own social space through incredible technological means. So your cell phone can be used as one, and another one is that everybody knows that your computer or laptop that you sit at, if you have a MacBook or any sort of web camera, can be turned on without it signifying that it is on. So an outside observer, if they know what they are doing, can look in upon you. The machine actually uses this to create a psychological profile on you, complete with psychological triggers in order to manipulate your behavior. I literally think it watches you in your own social space over an elongated period of time. So what it can do is, if you have any business ideas, it takes those ideas and can prime them into another person, which is extensively, for all extensive purposes, corporate espionage. Meaning, if you're sitting in your own social space and you are working on a business idea, and that's basically all business is ideas, I'll bet the money to be able to do it and the workforce and able to accomplish it. All business is an idea. So what it can do is, if you do not conform to its agenda, it can take that idea from you and supplant it into a competitor or another person that is sympathetic to the machine or follows the machine's psychological priming and programming. So it's based off of Eugene's agenda. Now, the machine is designed to protect the power structure, and this is no different from large agencies such as the CIA and FBI. Again, it is no stretch of the imagination that this could be used or developed as a product of a power structure protection. It is basically, again, an automated version of COINTELPRO and MK Ultra that is used in association with all the previously discussed mechanisms in order for self-preservation of a power structure. People ask me all the time, well, this just seems like some ethereal, abstract entity. No, I believe it's a physical machine. So I have developed or coined a phrase which I call residual backlash. It's the theory that the machine presents itself and its attributes to steer your mind away from them, just as we discussed in the entertainment theater. It seems as though it reveals itself that it has one main machine with a supercomputer with tracking satellites, as Dr. John Hall discusses. So an example of this is about 10 years ago, the military networked a bunch of PS3s together to create a supercomputer. So what I think happens is that there is one main machine, and in each city what you could do is you could have tertiary satellite machines. So 3 in one city, say. And then you could network them across the entire United States to create a super network for the machine. This is only compounded by the NSA's gathering of things like metadata, which is huge in amount and breadth of information, which can all probably be utilized by the machine to fulfill its agenda. And the progenitor of the organized gang stalking program is the American government or the American military. So it is no stretch of the imagination that this is indeed a silent, non-declassified governmental program. This brings me to my conclusion. The fact is that this entire program, the machine organized gang stalking program, is observable, repeatable, and needs testing. If it's observable, testable, and repeatable, that means it can be studied by science. And all of those are in occurrence The only thing we need to develop is a good way to test it. Now, when we do test the machine, although its existence is obvious, what is less obvious is that once you begin to delineate what the machine has done, you have to realize it's going to take time because it psychologically primes over all of popular culture and has been in existence for 50 years. Its slow progression away from the problem is going to be more like of a train stopping. When a train stops and you put on the brakes, it takes, sometimes depending on how big the train is, even a couple miles to fully stop. And it's a good, appropriate metaphor to show how long it's going to take to be able to stop this machine. We are going to have to identify the psychological triggers and then find out other psychological triggers that can be used to combat its influence. It's not going to be easy, and this is why research on the machine needs to happen immediately and is so important. The other factor is that when I talk about this stuff, people will think I'm delusional or mentally ill. Let's call a spade a spade. People still don't believe in evolution or understand it. They still believe that we evolved from monkeys, which is just laughable. Some people literally don't have the mental facilities to understand this, let alone evolutionary psychology or evolution. With that said, that doesn't mean the machine's existence isn't very real. That just means some people can't understand it. With that said, the situation and circumstances surrounding the machine organized gang stalking program are so dark that most people don't want to understand it. With that in mind, it is literally Hitler's big lie, as he talked about in Mein Kampf, which is that most people will be susceptible to a small lie because they can't fathom colossal untruths. It is also the big lie because it is literally of Nazi origins and again about eugenics. At this time, this is where I would like to remind the viewer that this is a civic duty. If there ever was a civic duty where you have to owe it a responsibility to your community that demands action, this is it. With that said, I would like to thank the viewer for watching and reaching for understanding.